Today we're solving absolute value equations and inequalities. So if you've never solved an absolute value equation before, really pay attention, because we're going to have to do not only equations but also inequalities, which means, guess what? We're graphing on a number line. Yay, it's coming back. So we're talking about absolute value. And absolute value is very tricky, because if you think about it, if I have the absolute value of x is equal to 3, there's two numbers that x could be that would make this statement true. X could be positive 3, because the absolute value of 3 is 3, so x could be 3. But x could also be negative 3, because the absolute value of negative 3 is also 3. So the thing that makes absolute value equations and inequalities difficult is that there's always going to be two answers. And I remember this by thinking about the absolute value bars. There's two bars, so there's going to be two answers. Okay, let's get going. Here is our first equation. We have 2t minus 3 plus 2 is all equal to 5. The very first thing you have to do with this is you have to get the absolute value bars completely by themselves. So I have these absolute value bars, and they're on one side of my equal sign. But right now there's a 2 that's still on that side of the equal sign. So what we need to do first is move the 2 to the other side, or we can't solve the absolute value problem. When I do that, I still have my absolute value bars. And inside is 2t minus 3. And that's all equal to a 3 now. Now that the absolute value bars are by themselves, you set up two equations, because like I said in the first slide, there's going to be two answers. The first equation is going to be 2t minus 3 is equal to 3, exactly like you see it. The absolute value bars are dropped. The other one's going to be 2t minus 3 is equal to negative 3. So all you do is you literally rewrite the first equation, just like you see it without absolute value bars. And then the second is almost the exact same thing, but instead of having a positive 3, we now have the negative 3. So you just convert it. And that's how you get your two answers. So I'm going to go ahead and solve these. We add 3 to both sides. And we get 2t is equal to 6. We divide by 2. And so one of our answers is that t is equal to 3. And over here we add 3, we add 3. So 2t is equal to 0. When you divide both sides by 2, you get that t is equal to 0. And so the solution set to this is that t is equal to 0 and t is equal to 3. I could plug both of those numbers into this original equation and get out 5. Okay, so that's how you solve absolute value equations. Let's talk about inequalities, because they're tricky. Here's our next example, inequalities. Remember I said we're going to have to graph these on a number line. So something about your final answer is going to tell you whether it's going to be an or statement or an and statement. If you remember or you shade out, and then and you shade between two numbers. Okay, but the first thing that we have to do is we got to get these absolute value bars completely by themselves, or else we can't set up our two statements. So right now I need to move the 4. I want to use blue. We're going to move the 4 to the other side, and we get negative. We still have our absolute value bars, and this sign is still the same. 3k plus 1, and then this is a negative 2. I still have this negative outside my absolute value bars. We can't have that. So I'm going to divide both sides by a negative 1. So now I finally have my absolute value bars by themselves. Since I divided both sides by a negative, my sign is going to change. So make sure you're aware of that. We have 3k plus 1 is greater than 2. Now how I remember this. If it's great, and I'm going to spell this wrong. If it's greater than, it's an or statement. If it's less than, it's an and statement. Okay? Right now this says greater than, so it's going to be an or statement. I want to erase all this so we have some room. Oh, I can't. Alright, here's what we have. Now I'm going to set up my two inequalities. And remember, we've decided that this is an or statement, which means we're going to be shading out. So our first inequality is going to be, you write it exactly like you see it. 3k plus 1 greater than 2. Exactly how you see it. The other one is just 3k plus 1. You must flip your sign. That's how you get the or. And it's negative 2. So if it's an or statement, you've got to flip your sign and then make the other number negative. So let's go ahead and solve these. Minus 1. So 3k is still greater than 1. Divide both sides by 3. So I'm going to go ahead and say that k is greater than 1/3. There's one of them. Our other one, we're subtracting by 1. We have 3k is still less than negative 3. I'm dividing both sides by a positive number, so you do not change your sign. It's still less than, and it's negative 1. So now I want to graph this on a number line. I'll do it up here. My two numbers are negative 1 and positive 1/3. Neither of them are equal to, so it's both open circles at both numbers. This says k is greater than 1/3, so all the numbers bigger than are this way. And this one says k is less than 1, so all the numbers less than are this way. And remember I said it was going to be an or statement, and that ended up being true. Remember, or is out. Okay? The next one. Here we go, our last example. Remember, I need to get those absolute value bars totally by themselves, and right now they are not. So I want to subtract my 3 from both sides. So I still have my absolute value bars. When I subtract, my sign does not change. It equals 3 now though. And I have 2u minus 1. This says 2u minus 1 is less than 3. And remember I wrote less than. Just so you remember that it's an and statement. So how we write our and statement is I'm literally going to copy. I dropped my absolute value bars, but I'm going to copy this. Minus 1 is less than or equal to 3. I'm going to use the exact same sign on this side, but instead of writing positive 3, I'm going to write negative 3. And here's the and statement that we're going to solve. So I literally took all of this and just moved it down exactly like we saw it. I used the exact same sign, and then I just wrote a negative 3. So we're going to go ahead and solve this. Plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. Our sign is still the same. It's still 2u. That sign's still the same. It equals 4 though. I'm going to go ahead and divide everything by 2. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. I divided by a positive, so my sign doesn't change. U is now by itself. Ta-da! So u is between negative 1 and 2. So to graph that, you have negative 1. We have 2. These are both equal to, so we're going to have closed circles at both of these inequalities. And u is between those two numbers, so I'm shading between the two numbers on the number line. And that's how we do those. To make sure you understand, we're going to do a warm-up problem as a class, and you can use your notes tomorrow. So make sure these are done, and you can ask me any questions. I know this was a lot and kind of confusing. Sorry the notes took so long. See you guys tomorrow.